Okay, hi everyone. So for today we are going to look at into paint and glass analysis. All right. So at the end of this chapter, you should be able to describe car paint and car accident investigation, and also the types of glass cracks in terms of radial and concentric cracks. Right. And then the second one, you need to be able to explain the laboratory analysis for paint and glass. All right. So now let's look on what is paint. Okay, so paint consists of pigments and additives which is suspended in a binder where the consistency can be adjusted by using a solvent, right? So you need to remember that paint would need to have pigments, additives, and binder, and the consistency can be adjusted by using solvent. All right. So there are two types of paint, which is solvent-based paint and powder-based paint. All right. So in the case of solvent-based paint, okay, you would have, as I said, you would need to have additives, pigments, and binders. Okay, and you have a solvents here to be used to adjust the consistency. Right. So for powder paint, they will not have any solvents. So we will have only additives, pigments, and binders only. All right. So when we are talking about powder, there will not be any consistency involved. All right. So that's why there is no solvent inside a powder-based paint. All right. So let's look at the first thing, which is the pigments. Alright, so the color of the paint is determined by the organic or inorganic chemicals we call pigments. So the most manufactured pigments is titanium dioxide, right? TiO2, which by itself provides a bright white color and lends opacity to other colors as well, right? So there are some examples here that you can look at. Okay, if you can see, if we want to have a carbon black, and usually we will have a carbon full of carbon C. If you had want to have like a more violet color, you need to have a cobalt 2 phosphate. All right, so this is an example of inorganic compounds in paints lah. All right. Okay, so additives. We have looked into pigments, now we are going to look into additives. Okay, additives would give a shine and opalescence towards the paint, right? So the paint binders pula, it is often the polymers that hold together all of the formulation, right? So the binder here would hold the additives, would hold the pigments, all right? Together inside the paint formulation. So the binders also would help in drying the paint into a smooth layer. Okay, so that is the function of additives, and this is the function of binders. All right. Okay, so now we are going to look at automotive paints. Okay, automotive paints straight away go to usually we go to cars ke ataupun any kind of kenderaan lah. Alright, so automotive paints, there are four types of four layers of automatic paints. So usually we begin with electrocoat, and then primer, color coat, which is the base coat, and then the clear coat, which is the top coat. Alright, so this is the body of the of the car, for example. So the first layer is the electrocoat, followed by primer, followed by the color layer, which is a color coat, which is the base coat, and then the clear coat, which is the top coat. So you need to remember that there are four layers of automotive paints on top of the body of the car. All right. So now we are going to look at what is electrocoat primer. Okay, electrocoat primer is applied to the steel body of the car. Alright, so it is the first layer. Okay, it is a mixture of the epoxy-based resins. So the function of these epoxy-based resins is to ensure that we need to provide a resistance to corrosion. Alright, so when the steel of the body, if it is being exposed to water, it will create corrosion. So the function of this epoxy-based resin is to ensure that we provide the steel of the body from corrosion, right? So to ensure that a thorough coating, So the frame, the steel frame of the car usually will be dipped into a tank full of epoxy-based resins. Alright? Okay. So that's the first layer, which is the electrocoat. The second coat is the primer. Okay, it is applied over the electrocoat. Okay, usually the primer is epoxy modified polyesters or urethanes. All right, so these epoxy modified polyesters or urethanes usually dry to a very smooth finish. All right, so it is now preparing the body for the color coat, the body of the car for the color coat. Okay, usually it comes in a variety of colors suited to the color of the coat that we are going to use. All right, okay. So the color code, which is the base code lah. Okay, so the color code will provide the color to the finished car with a fade resistant organic or inorganic pigments which is bound to an acrylic based polymer. Okay, so the color code ni here would provide the fade resistant. Okay, so it will not be easily fade. Okay, fade resistant organic and inorganic pigments. So in the color code as well, you would have pigments. Okay. Yelah, because it is a color code. So of course you're going to have pigments. So these pigments are going to be fade resistant pigments. Alright. So additives also will be added in the color code. For example, in this case, we are going to use microparticles of aluminium. So additives of microparticles aluminium would give a metallic finish onto the final look of the car. Alright. So the last coat is the clear coat, which is the top coat. Alright. So this clear coat would gives a glassy surface to the vehicle, and then it will create a colorless clear coat lah of acrylic and polyurethane material. Alright. It is also applied as a detailing to older cars to ensure that it looks new lah, renew their finish. Alright. So we have looked at into electro coat, which is the first. The second one is primer coat, so the primer layer, and then followed by the color coat, and then lastly is the clear coat. Okay. So what is the relevance of paints as evidence? Right. So paints would be present in almost any surface. So that is the first thing. It is present in almost any surface. So it is abundance. Okay, it is available in abundance. Okay, using a minute amounts of paints transferred during accident, forensic examiners can identify the make and the model of the car and also the color of the vehicle. Right? So usually when for example you okay in we take one example of Myvi. Okay, Myvi from Produa. So the color of the Myvi and produced by Produa is only specific to Myvi only. Okay, the color, the composition, everything is being documented. Alright, so that's why from the from the color itself, from the paint itself, we can ensure what is the make and the model of the car and what is also the color of the car. Okay, so the paint evidence often has layered structure. Okay, so as what we have looked before, we have 4 layers. All right, so these 4 layers also would be able to provide an information for individualization. Okay. All right. So that is the function of what is the relevance of paints as an evidence. Okay. So now, how are we going to collect and preserve the paint evidence? Okay, this is very important. Okay, how are you going to collect and preserve the paint evidence whenever that you are attending or you arriving at a crime scene or a scene where collisions of cars happens for you to be able to langgar lari ke? Okay, all right. So the paint and the coatings can be collected after they have been documented. All right. So in terms of what is the visual, by using just visual, what is the color, what is the make on the model. Usually kalau yang kereta is not totally lost, you can identify what is the make and the model of the car. All right. And then what is the original color of the car that is being hit on. All right. Okay. So you would also need to be able to preserve ataupun to collect uncontaminated standard or reference paint. Okay, uncontaminated standard or reference paint ni is going to be the part of the car that it has not been being hit on. Okay, for example, awak ambil apa yang kena langgar bahagian belakang. So wherever that the apa yang tidak dilanggar itu, awak boleh ambil itu sebagai the uncontaminated surface ataupun your punya reference lah, which is has not been hit on. Okay. So, loose paint flakes can be fragile. So, whenever that you are taking the sample of the paint, so this loose paint, it was supposed to have 4 layers kan? Tetapi it can be fragile. So, therefore, you need to be able to preserve the layers of the paint to avoid fragmentation. So, how are you going to do this? Is that you need to collect it by using tweezers, scalpel ataupun tape lift in order for you to preserve the layers and the paints lah basically. Okay, it needs to be stored in a properly labeled container that will minimize damage due to breakage. Alright, so this is something that is very important for you to be able to collect and preserve the paint evidence. Okay. Consideration should be given as to whether the damaged area or the one from which the exemplar is taken has been repainted. So this is an example of the car. Kan now kita modify kereta tu, modify in terms of dia punya apa hardware lah. But sometimes usually kita ada juga kereta yang telah di repaint. Okay, telah dipaintkan daripada warna asal. So this is something that you need to put into your consideration as well. Okay, for example, when you take the exemplar, which is the reference one yang saya cakap tadi, that I mentioned before, so you need to ensure that the paint or the reference that you've got is not, that has been painted on, okay, which is the new layer of the, which is the new paint of the car. Okay, so you need to observe the paint layering. So it is advisable to cut the exemplar at an angle using a thin blade. So when you use a thin blade, which is in this case kalau scalpel, at an angle lah, bukan scrape macam tu sahaja, at an angle, I think more or less about 45 degrees of angle. So you need to be able to cut into the deep of it to ensure that you've got all the layers. Alright, such angular cuts would facilitate also in peeling of the layer from one another. Okay. So besides paint, the evidence of oxidized tungsten filaments in the signal lamps may indicate that they were turned on during accident as well. Okay, so usually this is also another example lah. So when you took the tungsten filaments from the lamp of the car, if it is being oxidized, so you would suggest that okay, this vehicle, the lamp has been turned on during the accident. Okay, all right. So embedded paint transfer in clothing fabric or on a hard surface should be taken to the laboratory as it is. So when you are collecting evidence for paint, whatever paint that you've got onto the car, that you have collected, you need to be able to took everything to the laboratory as it is. Okay, so if it is a red car that has been hit on by a yellow car, of course there is going to be a yellow pigment onto the red car. So this yellow pigment, you should be able to take it to the lab as it is. Okay, you can collect the evidence, but please ensure that it is not the evidence is not being contaminated by breakage lah. So that's why we say that take the evidence as to the laboratory as it is. Okay. If this is not possible, as in a car accident, a sample of transferred paint should be taken on the base of the surface containing the paint evidence. Alright, so this is also another example. Takkan nak bawa satu kereta ke lab kan? Tetapi you should be able to preserve these things lah. Okay, right. So the laboratory analysis of paint evidence. Okay, what are the laboratory? So now you from the crime scene, you dah balik all the paints that you have collected. So now what are you going to do in terms of analysis? So the paint can be analyzed in a variety of microscopy chemical and instrumental methods in order to provide the characteristics ataupun component identification. Alright, so usually we will start with non-destructive analysis. Okay, so because the paint or any evidence is quite precious, alright? So that's why in this kind of cases, you should be able to start with the non-destructive first. In this case, we are going to use microscope for you to be able to view all the layers and peel all the layers. Okay. The second one is the solubility test. Okay. FTIR also can be used, and lastly is TLC. Okay. So all of this, you need to be able to know to justify on why this method has been chosen to analyze paint, right? So microscopic, this is the justification lah. Kalau microscopic, we can look at the condition, the size, the shape, the color, whether it has been ada tak wear and tear dekat dalam paint analysis itu. Alright, so and then identify all the layers. Right, so it's been documented by using a photography. Right. While color is the most obvious distinguishing characteristic, the overall texture of the paint, the composition of each layers are also important. Okay, because this is what I've talked about. This links back to the individualization of the paint, which is can go back up to the make and model of the car and also the color of the car. Okay. So microscopy, we can also always use SEM analysis. So this is scanning electron microscope, where it is to characterize the morphology of the paint samples and the elemental composition of the paint sample. Okay. Solubility and microchemical test. Okay, this is quite this is a destructive techniques lah. This is also, for example, for you to be able to apply a single layer of paint or components to the entire sample. And then when a whole sample of automotive paint is tested, the layers may react differently as compared to individual layer. So when you have peeled each of the layer, the 4 layers, and then when you do TLC, each of the 4 layers would have a different output as compared when you have the whole 4 layers to do TLC, right? Oh, sorry, TLC plus solubility test. Alright. Flakes of paint may react differently lah, as I mentioned before. For this solubility test, you can use acetone, chloroform, dichloromethane, xylene. Okay, usually when you have done the solubility test, it will be continued on using FTIR or GC ataupun GCMS for you to be able to identify the components in each of the layers and also the combination of the layers. Alright. Pyrolysis or gas chromatography. Okay, pyrolysis gas chromatography is a destructive technique where you just put the paint into the pyrolysis and it will straight away vaporize all the paints, and then it will be analyzed by the GC. Okay. So yes, the volatilized gases and the decomposition of the products are injected into the gas chromatography and being separated inside the column. Okay, I think that is all for paint, and then we will continue with glass after this. All right, thank you everyone.